right, theology nerds, this is Trip, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity. For over 12 years, we've been bringing you interviews with scholars across the disciplines to help you think faithfully and critically about life's biggest questions. And today, joining me is my friend, a scholar of intercultural communication, the man behind the mic at the Profane Faith podcast, and a smart, fun, insightful, and dear friend, Daniel White Hodge. That's right. He's on the podcast, and you're going to enjoy it because it's almost impossible not to do so. Before we jump into this episode, and you get to hear from this prophetic, insightful voice and his own experience as a black scholar and person of faith wrestling with growing up in a white evangelical context and in the academy and the questions that are raised in it. It's such a powerful and good conversation. Before we get into that, I just want to let you all know, if you're listening to this on Wednesday, the day after the first presidential debate, when it just came out, that Diana Butler-Bass and I are doing a live stream tomorrow called Ruining Dinner. That's right. You know the things you're not supposed to do at dinner? Like talk about religion and politics. Where we're going to do that. That's what we're going to do. And Diana Butler-Bass is one of America's greatest historians of religion in America, popular communicator around questions of religion and politics. And I'm just super pumped that she's agreed to do this. We're going to go on a live stream, and there we will let you all know a little fun and exciting thing we're going to be doing together. All right? So just get ready. Get ready. You can go to Facebook, go to my YouTube or my Twitter. It'll all show up there. And if you go look at the event on the Homebrewed Facebook page, there's even a link if you want to join on Zoom. So check it out. It'll be fun. Now, last thing, I just want to say thank you to all of the Homebrewed Christianity community members. Those are the people that went to homebrewedcommunity.com, signed up. They donate each month to make this podcast possible. They get access to a private members-only podcast stream with tons of exciting things in it, like classes on Whitehead, Bonhoeffer, Black Theology, classes I did with Jack Caputo and John Cobb, and there's so much on there. But I got an email that said, Trip, you need to let everyone know that Walter Brueggemann's Introduction to the Hebrew Bible, where he explains what the task of the preacher today is in our current political context, channeling and bringing the prophetic voice, it is too good for other ministers not to know. So if you want to hear that, you should join it. I'm just telling you. Oh, they're clapping. See, other people agree. So check it out, homebrewedcommunity.com. Thank you, all members. Looking forward to connecting soon, because coming up, the next big class and lecture series is one I'm going to be doing on all the big questions in philosophy of religion. That's what I'm doing. I've been working on the lectures right now. So we're going to be doing philosophy of religion next with all the members only group. Enjoy this episode. Daniel White Hodge. Boom. All right. Hello, everybody. This is Trip. And today, the one and only Daniel White Hodge is on the podcast. And y'all are about to go down for some exciting fun because, there are very few people I have on the podcast that have other podcasts, and I'm pretty confident I've listened to every episode. Now, I do have some friends that have had podcasts like, 7 or 8 years, right? So then I feel like if it's 75% of the episodes, that's like you're a real listener. But you are listen to them all. And other fun fact, Daniel, this is how I knew I was going to like you. Right? I was doing a podcast at Progressive Youth Ministry Conference in Chicago.
I remember that.
And you were coming on the podcast, and then you got a call from your family, and you were like, I need to get, my family called, they need me to show back up. So are you cool if I peace out on you? And I was like, I've decided I like this guy forever. Like you know how hard it is to turn down an audience of people that are tipsy on free beer, ready to congratulate you on all your hot theological one-liners. That's hard. I don't think I would have said no. I think I would have said, I'll try to go first. And you said, I want to go home. I was like, this is why I like Daniel.
Oh, man. I tell you, I remember that. I do. I remember that. And it's something to do with the kiddo. And, wow.
And you take your kids fishing.
That's true. Absolutely. In fact, we just went again. It was on Sunday, man. We got skunked, but that's okay. It was still fun.
I know, because, people don't understand when they ask about fishing. Like, fishing is 4 or 5 minutes of excitement about the fish.
Yep.
But then it's an hour or two of space where silence is allowed.
Yep.
And any questions on the table.
Any question. Any question.
Yeah. So, like, I love fishing with my kids, but, if you don't want to go fishing with yours, there's a high likelihood I'll take them.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, I definitely enjoy it. And my daughter, I'm thankful she does as well. So, yeah, she's in it. This is her last year and next year she'll have to get her a fishing license. But this is her last year that she doesn't have to get one. So we've had a lot of good times and traditions and all that good stuff. So, yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, so some of the people on some podcasts probably listen to both. Others don't. Some of the people in our Black Theology reading group are going to be aware of your work. Some don't. So, like, when you think of introducing yourself, your passion, your story to people, like, what are those, like, 2 or 3 points you want the person introducing you to mention so that they're just assumed once you grab the mic?
Oh, man, I tell you. Well, I mean, definitely a dad, a partner to a great other partner, Emily, and she has definitely helped me along the way to see just a broader vision, just even for my own life. I mean, right? And it's like it's been amazing, just to be in that partnership and working all the lovely things out. We'll celebrate 19 years here in November. So almost in the 20-year range here. And, scholar, thinker, I like to think of myself as those things, at least, author, hip hop head. At one point I used to, think, I'm a film and theology kind of guy. And then I hang out with like somebody like Craig Detweiler and for like 10 minutes and I'm like, oh man, I clearly am not as in-depth the knowledge of film as much as I thought I was. So yeah, I do, but I do enjoy all things pop culture and try to better, try to better understand what is going on.
Mm-hmm. So when you think of your own life and story of faith and story as an intellectual, like what would you say the background affirmations that have run through the whole thing? Like in your coming to faith in your own, owning it, to the challenges, to leaving things behind, to asking big questions. Like from the very time you started asking questions, what is that affirmation or depth dimension that has lingered and you cling to?
Wow. Wow.
You ask big questions to your guests, so I feel like I have more permission.
That's right. That's right. That's a good one. That's a good one. And, before I go any further, man, I appreciate you having me on. This is great. I've listened to your podcast for many years. In fact, I took cues from you. I think I saw you one time at AAR. It was in the audience and you were talking about like downloads and everything. At that point, I didn't even know what an RSS feed meant or it was. So I was like, well,
I still don't know what the initials mean. I just know what it is.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm excited to be on here and just, be engaged, with your listeners and whatnot. I think some of the things that have been constant is are the spirit of questioning and doubt has been throughout, even when in my Bible thumping fundamentalist days of, out on the block and, preaching the word of God, out in, in NorCal. And then, of course, when I was with Young Life, but there was still a sense of questioning, a sense of fairness, equity, what that might look like. I think it really exploring and wanting to better understand who Jesus was in context. I've always had some problems with Paul, I'm not going to lie. And Jesus, though, fell into a much different category. And I was like, I like this cat. This cat's got some good stuff. And I always, I wish I could have, like in Back to the Future, I wish I could have gotten in that DeLorean and gotten, when Doc punches in, which is the birth of Christ, and I'm like, yeah, let me go back. Let me go talk to JC, right? I think those things have been present. I mean, theological terms, what that might mean ontologically. I think my faith has definitely been evolving. I mean, I think definitely going to Fuller was eye opening. I mean, for the first time in my life, and at that point I was in my 30s already. I'm really starting to understand, origins of the Bible, right? Mm-hmm. Translations. Up until that point, I was involved in, in the black church, and not to knock the black church, but this was the Seventh-day Adventist black church. And so we were King James Bible only. And so, anything else was definitely, I remember whole sermons being preached on how, inaccurate the NIV was, and like the Apocrypha was just like demonic. And so it was like, you don't even want to think about anything like that. So again, even in that, I'm still asking, like, but why, right? And like, wait a minute, if Adam and Eve were together and they were the only people on earth, like somebody gonna have to eventually get busy with their sister. Like, Pastor, what the hell was going on there, man? So those have been present. I mean, I think also, I just have a heart for things. I mean, even with my daughter getting in trouble, I'll just have this heart for, for compassion. And my bark is big, but I mean, at the end of the day, I'm kind of just a big teddy bear. And the dog, all the dog has to do is just look at me, and I'll like, okay, all right, here's the fat of the steak. All right, here you go. My bad. I don't know why I was eating it. Here, you can have it all. So, it's stuff like that has been, embedded. And I don't know if I can attribute all that to faith, if it's just part of my own DNA or family lineage. I don't know, but I just definitely know as I've become more and more awoke, as certain young folks say, that I've seen those patterns emerge. So that's a good question.
So, in thinking of our conversations, thinking of all the different, episodes of your podcast I've listened to, things I've read and stuff, like you really touched on them, like the three things that popped in my mind. And it really strikes me as this is a gift that the evangelicals that are members of the black church get that don't show up in white evangelicalism, like the connection of them. So, and this is like Tripp's idea why he asked this question. Is it there is that kind of like background hum of affirmation, right? Like, like your identity as the beloved, but underneath that is also this a promissory note of the judgment and demand of God for justice is bigger, right? And so like whatever is the case isn't final. And so it's okay not just to, right, like ask questions like you talked about, but the questions are connected to what already is the case isn't good enough. It's not all that can be. It's not all that will be. And that promissory note of the gospel is different than the kind of name it and claim it element. And this is something that's shown up in a number of interviews I've done recently. And I realized when I was writing out questions to interview you, the reason I asked that to a number of other like black theologians of note was from your podcast. Was it?
Man!
Like in listening, especially the two interviews you've done with Andre Johnson, is that the very nature of the gospel is like, if you believe it, it's like it can't have come yet. And now imagine, like, if you believe it, it was great. It was great in the past. Now we got to get it great again. Right? Like that diametrically opposes something that doesn't mean how you check off doctrines. It's how you interpret the present situation. Does that make sense? Like,
your
hermeneutics of culture.
There you go.
Rearranges what the very same kind of like doctrinal affirmations even mean.
Yeah. No, man. Yes, that's good. I like that. That'll preach, as they say.
Well, what struck to me is, and I don't remember what the event was, but you posted this talk where basically on your podcast, where it was an evangelical social justice-y type group, where you just decided not to hit the mute button anymore. And
yeah.
And so this is a giant lure for everyone to go find that episode and listen to it. I wonder if you could tell me, because one of the questions that came up in our Black Theology reading group from ministers who are in a Black church that is multi-ethnic and asked this question, and ones that are a white minister in a congregation which they said know better. Which I don't know, whatever that means.
Yeah, right.
But like that decision to just like rip the Band-Aid off and be honest. So could you describe what came into that moment, and then what it was like to say, like, I'm just going to be honest, and then give the lure for everything you say. You don't have to say it, because I want everyone to go download it and listen to it. But
man, I appreciate
it was
that.
one of those moments where when you listen to it, if they've encountered you, hung out with you off the record, you're like, Dan's preaching fire. That's exactly what I expected. Then you start looking at Twitter, and you say to yourself, I think some people don't know Dan.
That's a good description, man. I like that. That's very accurate. Very accurate. I mean, I think, yes. I mean, I know that time. I mean, there was a lot going on in terms of just my own frustration. And I have frustration with evangelicalism, but I particularly am irked when it's POC centered. And right, these are my people. These are folks that I've been really in labor pains with for easily the last 25 years, right? Whether it be through Young Life or Youth on the Move or Urban Youth Workers Institute or fill in the blank, right? It's like any of those spaces. So I felt frustrated that we're still having some of the same conversations over and over again. And I think, I mean, I don't mean to get like all spiritual and, the devil behind every bush, but I think that was a time for me that, I went to Emily, my partner, and I was like, yo, so I've been asked to do this. And I actually turned them down. The first time they asked, they were like, hey, will you do this talk? And I was like, nah, man. You'd asked me even 2 years prior to that. I would be like, yes, me, pick me. And I learned early on in my career that, it's like for stuff like that, it's better to be asked than to ask, right? So it's just... But at that point, I was just kind of like, no, I don't want to do it. And the folks came back and they're like, look, we really do want you to do and to say what you got to say. And I was just like, but there's not filter. I'm like, this is going to be. They're like, yeah, I know. I even remember even the night before my talk, I sent my notes to a good friend of mine who at the time was the chair on the board. And I was just like, this last moment, I can easily say I'm sick tomorrow and bow out and it'll be a clean wash. And, sent them my notes and they were like, go for it. So I was like, all right. So I really felt heavy, man, because I really felt like this was my way of just saying, look, man, I'm with you. I got much love for you, but I'm just done with the BS. I'm done with having the same conversations we was having in 1994. I'm done. Like, we got freaking touchscreen iPhone 50s, like, back, like, why are we still dealing with flip phones? Why are we still dealing with the Motorola Razr when we're clearly in a different era? And so that was what was going on, man. And I remember the amount, I haven't felt that much pressure since there's several other times in life that I felt that. One, when I met my Emily's dad for the first time, right? Going in and meeting him, I was like, man, this is Minnesota. I never seen that much snow before. Like, God dang, man, this is just a lot of snow. And it was cold. It wasn't even like snow and like, oh, that's pretty, like Lake Tahoe. It was like, nah, bro, you get out, man. That snow is like grabbing you in your growing and saying, hey, how you doing, bro? And so I'm going in and I'm sweating bullets, right? And so, you know, and the excitement of having my daughter born and being there present, definitely for that. And just feeling the heaviness of that, because I felt like there was so many things on the table, right? There's Trumpers, there's Trumpism, there's issues of LGBTQI, there was issues from former employees of this organization who were staging a protest and an action, you know, at that time. And so I just felt all these things, man. And so I was like, well, let me try to vent these and channel these the best way I can. And I can really say that I really did feel like God was saying, yeah, go for it. Go on, man. You know, go, you know, shoot.
Yeah.
Do what you got to do. Do you.
Well, and one of the things that struck me, and I mean, this is obviously like listening to you give the talk while I was doing dishes or something, you know, like, but podcasting is a very intimate thing. It's in your ear.
It is. Yes.
While you're doing something, and you know, there's only a few people that whisper into my ear, and you are one of them.
Oh man. All right.
You know what I mean?
That's what I'm talking about.
I mean, a lot of them have to do with Lakers basketball, but outside of those, but is it when you listen in that way versus listening in a room? I wonder what the difference was, because when I listened to the podcast, I was just like, he is being completely honest, and the criticism is not towards someone he wants to throw under a bus. It's someone he loves and wish they were better. Yes. And as a minister, I mean, I served congregations full time for 13 years before being a full-time academic. And yeah, I've sat with a family that has done interventions and listened and held the hand of someone uncomfortable with reality being handed to them. And yet, no one in that room had anything but full love and affirmation for the person that needed to hear the truth. And that moment was the first time, like, I heard the kind of white evangelical, we think of ourselves as do-gooder group, like, hear someone being that honest. And since then, I feel like that's happened more and more. Now, in my world, like, you were one of the first people to like kind of do it directly in that context. But I feel like the last year, and then especially since COVID, George Floyd, and Black Lives Matter, like, it's becoming more and more prevalent. And so, like, I want to ask you the question I asked family members after they were honest. Like,
ask, brother.
Was it liberating to tell someone you love them and you want better for them?
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, yes, there was a sense of relief, that burden or that pressure. And that's a very good way of doing it. I mean, I've been in those intervention, areas and spaces, both as a family member and as a minister myself and whatnot. And there is that sense of heaviness that exists, right? Going into it, because you're like, oh my gosh, here's a person I love. I got to have this now really heavy conversation. Right. For me, it was my mom, you know, about her drug usage, right? And so we're having this intervention, but afterwards it's kind of like, all right, well, I put it all on the table and I left it there. And, you know, it was kind of like in football when I played football, and coach was always just like, leave it all on the field. And I felt like that's exactly what I did.
Mm-hmm. And so when you think of that, your own kind of story of faith and that intersection of, or maybe put it not necessarily an intersection, but like when you go to Fuller, in Fuller, I think struggles to be intentional about being, multicultural in different ways. And I was thrilled that Amos Young has new leadership roles there. He's a friend of the podcast and one of the kindest and most brilliant people I know to negotiate those time attention. Like, this isn't a negative statement about Fuller Theological Seminary that I was trying to say. I was mostly saying, like, when you go in that context, it's ones that was initially formed in the kind of rejection of modernity in white evangelicalism. And yet Fuller's also historically on that, like, cutting edge of acceptable white evangelicalism. Both being in Los Angeles, both in like the cultural space that's there. And so when you show up, I've encountered just from the podcast, lots of people from different traditions and things who, their tradition claps for them when they go up there and then encounter this wealth of knowledge and critical thinking and stuff that then the tribe that sent them goes, huh? Once they show back up with in their hand of the microphone.
Yeah.
And yet for multiple people, there is this simultaneous experience for people that don't come from white evangelicalism. It's not just an encounter with, say, historical criticism, religious pluralism, this type of thing. It's also an awakening that, like, what we call biblical Christianity has an inertia that has socio-political, cultural tensions to it that are not going to be acknowledged by a lot of your peers and faculty.
Yeah.
Like, how would you describe your own experience of, like, the intellectual quest being given to you and the context where you realize the latent white supremacy in American Christianity?
Ooh, man, Trip, you be asking them, man. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I love. Here's the thing. I will say this, and I've said this for a while now. It's that I feel, when you talk about acceptance, when you talk about, like, right, the scholarship that has been given to me, the education that I've earned and put to use, I will say that white evangelical spaces, even though I probably have some of my harshest criticism of that, has probably been way more accepting than Black and Latinx spaces. Mm-hmm. And as I've pondered that, through the years, a lot of it obviously has to do with identity and privilege. And I get that some folks are able to disidentify with their religion and, hold it over here and be like, all right, yes, let's talk about this abstract whatever, right? Whereas for Black and brown, spaces, we just often don't have that, right? Like one pastor told me, when I went to go speak, I was up in somewhere in Michigan, and he was an African-American pastor, and we were talking about, I think Rob Bell's book had just dropped on something. I'm forgetting which book it was. But anyways, it's like on postmodern something. And
he's offended them a bunch of times.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Repeat
it was
offender.
One of them. Right. Exactly. He's a repeat, right? Habitual line crosser. Right. And it was, and I remember this Black pastor telling me, he was just like, I that's cool. But we don't have time in our community to, be sitting around smoking cigars, drinking stuff, because we got people who are about to die. We got people who are about to be evicted. We got people who are being shot at. We got all these So I felt like almost real timid my first, really even 6 years out of 6-7 years out of my PhD going into those spaces, because I didn't feel like I could really be honest. And going back to what you said about my talk, I really felt like that was me standing in that space saying, no, this is really what it is. I mean, this is what I was trying to say in the last few books. And this is now I'm just putting it into this 18-minute talk or whatever, how many long minutes they gave me and stuff, right, to do this talk. So I think that's been an ongoing challenge for me. I mean, and just the wrestling, but, with that, I feel kind of an outsider in many regards. I feel like, well, I love the cultural aspects of the Black church, music and whatnot. I can't deal with the over religified, ideological structures that's continue to surround that, and just kind of the same old mentality that exists in those spaces in regards to LGBTQ people, swearing, curse words. It's like, oh my gosh, really? I mean, I taught in the D-Min program for Fuller, on their transformational African American studies program, which is a great program. But that was my first class, day one, week one. I'm just like, we gonna get into some stuff in here. And I can tell you right off the bat, I'm going to push you to think beyond, again, the King James version of theology that has surrounded us for so long. And that's what I appreciated about James Cone. I think when I really came to really appreciate James Cone was when the criticism, I think it was 2011, when Monica Miller was just really like, man, really like not. Some people thought, oh, she's just going in. She ain't got no respect. But I appreciated James's position because he was able to stand in there and be like, you know what? This is great, because when we sat down, we didn't even have the opportunity to even have discussions like this, let alone have a black woman, right, stand up and give criticism, right, to a man. And so, like, you know, and he was just like, yeah, those are things that we need to be engaged with and deal with it, rather than taking the traditional position of, especially in the black place, right? If you have a PhD and you got all these titles, you're deferred to as, you know, this respect. And I don't feel like I've got that. And I don't know, it's just some of the oddballness that I feel about my own space. And so, yeah, if I had to, you know, if when I land somewhere, I mean, it's usually in those white spaces that, you know, I mean, I think about, for example, Wild Goose Festival, right? It's like I go there, and aside from the town that's surrounded and all the Confederate flags and all that stuff that's there, I'm like driving in at night, you're just like, Lord Jesus, don't let this battery die on me tonight. Once I got into the camp, I'm like, oh, these are my people. This is, I should have been coming to this. You know, and so that's this, I don't know if even that response even makes sense, but that's kind of what I've been thinking about when you asked that question.
Mm-hmm. No. In Wild Goose, for people that could imagine a post-COVID world and, you know, gatherings outside is a wonderful place to go. And the town is definitely its own thing. The last time we were both there and I was about to run into you and your daughter, I had almost gotten myself arrested in town because,
oh Lord,
well, I didn't know what the rules were on open carry in that town.
Oh Lord, oh
not
no.
on guns, but in craft beverages.
There you go.
And so, as just walking out of the craft beer store, I found this beer that I'd been wanting to try, and it didn't exist in California. So I decided I'm going to drink it. And I'm about 10 feet from the campground, and this cop like throws a siren on, comes over, and I may have been imbibing. So I perhaps have no clue as to what this cop's doing, and I'm concerned. You know, I'm worried for what he's trying to do. I'm
right.
like, officers, there's something I can help you with. And he says, well, it depends on what you're drinking. And like all of a sudden it computes. You could see the other two people with me who had not gone to happy hour at Wild Goose and are clearly sober, or like, you just opened a beer in the middle of downtown walking around. And I realized this cop's about to get upset at me. And so I did what every white guy in rural country does, turns on his Southern accent. And all of a sudden I said, now, officer, I recognize that I'm about 10 feet from the campground, and I was just feeling a little thirsty. So I opened this thing up. Now, I know it's a mistake. I'm just going to walk right over here while we're looking at each other and set it down. And then I'm going to come shake your hand because you're a good man. Now, the other two people who were with me were not straight white men.
Okay.
And I do exactly what I said. I set the beer down right on the campground little knob, you know, like the peg thing goes. Walk back over, I shake that guy's hand, and he goes, now, you know, there's a lot of crazy Christians in here. I go, oh, we collect all kinds. Now, if you want to come tonight, we have a little moonshine Eucharist, you know, like Lord's table, communion with the moonshine and the donuts, if you want to come. And he goes, y'all do that? I was like, mm-hmm. We sing some hymns. We just hit that moonshine. And then, I mean, you just feeling it. The love is everywhere. And he's like, I had never heard of that before. Oh no. I have to ask my wife if I'm going to do that. She told me I shouldn't be doing the moonshine anymore. You know?
Oh man.
And I'm like, all right, well, if you just come over here. You tell them Tripp said you should come. Like, and I walk off. Both people with me, members of the LGBTQ community, very vibrant in their expression of it. Just go, what the hell just happened, Tripp? I was like,
right.
I was like, redneck got to turn it on at the right time. And it's like, and I feel like that moment, like for them and for me, expresses like this moment we're in. especially in lockdown and social media, that they're like huge pockets of this giant country who exist in completely different universes. And if you exist in multiple like spots in the universe, you can turn on an accent and perform for one, and they go, I don't feel alienated by your presence as long as you use that accent and say things at me. So break a law is about to impose on the two gay friends you had, right? Like, and like, while I completely get privilege enabled me to do it, it also just, it dumbfounds me that there on the other side is someone who really just wanted some affirmation, and then he found like he could identify with you, right? Like,
yeah,
underneath these insecurities in these silos we put ourselves in, these cultural boundaries, are people who really feel insecure and just want to know if we belong.
yeah.
And I feel like we're being manipulated. And this is because people don't know, you're a professor of like communication and mass media. So I wonder like how you see this, right? Like that wild goose contrast you brought up made me want to ask this question, go like, how is it that I knew how to like perform two cultures in a sense, right? And both those groups were fun. Like they're like, Trip's cool. But like, I feel like underneath it, there in both sides, there's this deep sense of insecurity in a world with so much multiplicity and pluralism and stuff. Like, how do we learn to communicate where, I don't know, the implicit antagonism isn't there? Is that an option, or is it required at this moment?
Man, that's another great question, man. And I love this story because I'm sitting there thinking, and having been to Wild Goose and knowing that little area, that whole area, I'm picturing it in my mind, and just having that conversation, right? It's like, oh man, God bless it. That's amazing. That's wild, brother. That's wild. And I think that we have a very small window where we can still have that implicit conversation, but man, it's like I tell my students, we watch several different documentaries, and depending on which course it is, and one of them we watch is called The White Right, Meeting the Enemy. I don't know if you had a chance to see that. It's great documentary. I am forgetting her name. I always forget her name. She's actually from London. This is a Muslim filmmaker, activist, lefty liberal, and she went down and basically walked with and just bunkered in with the, neo-Nazis and during Charlottesville, and just kind of filmed all of it. And then she went on and talked to the alt-right and everything. And by the end, very long story short, you have one person who's saying kind of like, oh, maybe I'm backwards on this. One guy who's just like has the big swastika tattoo on his chest and says Jews and homosexuals, right, are going to burn in hell and they'd all be shot. And he's like, well, maybe I should, have some conversations with a Muslim woman. You're the first Muslim woman I've been this close to. And so it's like I tell everybody, man, it's like, man, at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. Once we pass those markers, those barriers, those major obstacles, we are just at the core, just that human person. We are at the core just wanting to be accepted, wanting to be listened to. When you listen to the chants of the white guys, right, it's like, we will not be erased, or you will not erase us, right? That's kind of their chant. You will not erase us. And you listen to working class white folks who have been radicalized into the alt-right or neo-Nazis and fascism, right? It's all about identity. It's like my race is not going to be erased. Now, we can have those conversations historically about what that really means. But to get past some of those things, man, I mean, when you talk to the core of Black Lives Matter, to go to the opposite end, right? Folks are just wanting to survive, wanting to just live, right? I just want to be able to walk down the street, right? And we have so much to hurdle over it. And because we're losing a baseline of truth, we're losing a baseline of what is facts, what is real. We are in a place where, we can sink right into our tribes and into our clans and easily say, well, you know what? They're the devil over there. Liberals, they're horrible. They're trying to bring a satanic revolt into this country, and vice versa, right? And this is where I'm currently at. And maybe it's because I've been, locked out of Twitter for 3 months, right? It's I've been in Twitter.
I still tag you on things.
I love it. I love it, man. I see, and that's the thing. I get those notifications. I just can't do anything with them. So, I just think like, okay, I don't want to become a fundamentalist and just be on the other side of things. I don't want to become a thumping whatever, a thumping, amendment person, or a thumping, this and this and that. And I want to be able to have enough critical sense to see, okay, where's the manipulation going on here, right? What is the implicit bias? What is the confirmation bias? What are these, implied narratives that we see and that we pick up, particularly in transmediated spaces like social media? How are those things manipulating me into retweeting, resharing, liking, commenting? Can you believe this? Can you believe that? And that's not to let people like Trump off the hook. That's not to let the alt-right off the hook. That's not to let police officers who are aiming to kill black bodies off the hook. All I'm simply saying is like when I think about humanity, our own humanity, I wish we could. I really wish we could, that we could see each other, in that sense. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it will take aliens coming at the same time. I don't know. It's like, I think Keenan and Key and Peele did a whole skit on that about how, if aliens showed up and white people started being nice to them, that's how they could tell the aliens from the humans and stuff. So white people were overly nice to them and like, hey, how you doing? Like, that's an alien, man. That's an alien. So, yeah, brother, I don't know. I wish. I think we still have that window, but it's closing rapidly. And that's, for me, it's what is part of what, quote unquote, keeps me up at night. Don't get me wrong. I sleep well. I need my 7-8 hours, but it continues to be the pea in the mattress that I think about a lot. And how easy it is to be like, well, that's not really real. That's not what my sources over here say this. Yeah. So anyway, I'll stop with that. I mean,
and I guess part of it is like in a situation like that, right? Like, that one itty bitty town in the middle of the mountains all of a sudden has this like influx of a couple thousand progressive Christians, right?
Right.
That means that all of a sudden certain people that don't have a community anywhere else they live did. So they can walk a little different, right? And it also means that the community that hosts them there, like, has a financial benefit for them being there, right? So there's no need to create a problem, and so like those two variables change how it was like easier to kind of quell the tension at that moment, but those two variables are unrelated to the character of the individual, right? They're how we choose to organize society. That financial interest in a bunch of people being present somehow makes your identity more valid. And that's like the problem for me is why is that necessary? Like, why do you need a certain volume of people from some particular location or like a financial means, right? Relationship for someone's identity to be affirmed and valued. And, you would think on our best days, any of the religious traditions, especially one that God chose a homeless first century Jew who is executed and rejected by the religious, political, and social establishment, they would think that's like on our like main agenda of activities to do. But like, do you think as someone who pays attention to the way our communications taking place under new technology, do you think like the more and more distance, like eye to eye distance, our technology puts between us, that's harder? Or like what are the variables you look at where if you're thinking of, say, a parent or a community leader and you're wanting to dial something back, so those kind of basic intuitions that when a cop looks in the eyes of these three people walking across kind of tipsy with open containers and decides this isn't a big deal. Like once those eyes meet, you realize you're humans. Once you do something to signal connection, it can change. But so many times the individuals are never recognized, right? Like, this is a black guy and he has a hoodie on. So obviously, right? Like things like that, where their individuality never gets recognized. And then the cop becomes a cop and not like any particular person. And you could see those stories existing, but I wonder if you take outside of those moments, your identity as any location and your identity in any vocation is so mediated by digital space and not face-to-face connections. Like, how does that impact things?
Man, I think that's the $1 billion question, right? I mean, it's like, and I get that it's easy to snap to a judgment of, oh, this generation doesn't know how to connect. Well, honestly, when you do the history of it, I mean, people have been having that saying for hundreds of years. I mean, people said the same thing about the printing press. Oh, we're no longer going to have conversations. People said the same thing about the newspaper. Oh, you can't even walk down the street anymore. People got their head and they're, buried in a newspaper. Nobody even talks on the train anymore. And so, right, it's the same thing about television, right? My generation, I grew up latchkey kid, right? You come home, it's like you turn on the television. Oh, these kids are going to turn out to be morons. And it's like, well, I don't want to jump on it. I think the challenge with that, and we've known this for a long time, right? It's like, I always tell folks, I don't care what religion you are, but, money is really the where we all come back to, and we have to, right? These microphones ain't just going to show up by themselves. This technology, this laptop, all these things, my little lab and studio monitors, those things don't pop up. So that money has to come from somewhere. And at the end of the day, what does that mean? Because you're absolutely right. People don't start to pay attention until they have to pay something for it. Right. It's like Aldi, right? Aldi says, well, we got to cut costs somewhere. So rather than having somebody go out with a grocery cart, we're going to make you put in 25 cents to get a grocery cart. Now you'll get that 25 cents back. But somehow somebody said in a study that 25 cents makes people go back and give the cart back, right? 25 cents. And I'm like, what is the motivating factor in me seeing you as a human being, right? I mean, because it's like I hear some of these videos, right, where, talking about police, right? They're talking about, well, I feel threatened for my life, or I want to be able to go home and see my family. I do too. I mean, George Floyd did too. I mean, Mike Brown did too. I mean, so, right, the list goes on. And if I'm staying behind a screen, it's very easy to vilify, right? It's very easy to just retweet and to see these folks as just that. The other side, they're bad. It's like when I leave the city here in Chicago. One of the things I despise about fishing is going out into rural spaces. I love the country. I love the outdoors, always have. But the culture that comes with it is, woo, man, I had to go out and get bait. And my Emily was like, you gonna be all right? Like, you want me to go? Because, I was like, let me keep tabs on you. Turn your notification, like where I can find you on. If I don't hear from you, like in, 10 minutes, let me know. So those are the type of things, right? Because it's like, we know you go into those space and places that it can turn real quickly because of what, right? Television and videos have shown to be that I am that threat. I am the one is somehow, holding people back. And once I'm seen that way, it's very difficult to get back to a humanity perspective, right? It's very difficult to get back to that, right? I mean, and that ties right into like modern warfare. It's like, it's like they say, no human being psychologically can kill another human being. Well, I have to dehumanize you. I have to call you a gook or a chink or a Jap, or I have to call you a sauerkraut or whatever, right? It is so that I can kill you. Because like you said, if I have to look you in the eye, that's some crazy stuff, right? People who can look other people in the eye. I mean, and then you start getting into psychopathic behaviors and, that type of stuff, but that's a whole nother conversation. My point is that it takes a lot to see the humanity, and there are aspects of humanity that we see every year in the United States since September 11th, 2001. We try to pause and talk about the humanity of what happened on 9/11. Absolutely. We should. Just like every other tragedy that's been going on, right? It's just like, well, I don't see anybody putting up a statue of Osama bin Laden at Ground Zero in New York. It's historical. I mean, right? Here's the man who brought down the big Western giant. Hey, I don't support him, but hey, it's historical. Let's, of course not. Of course not. You wouldn't want that. You wouldn't be a big old picture of Osama bin Laden standing on the back of a horse, looking all proud and dignified off into the future. Like, of course not. But again, the humanity of that is that says, well, I don't really see you as a human anyway. You don't have any more of them rights. So of course we're going to put these statues up. So I struggle. I really do struggle. I struggle because I do want to connect, and COVID hasn't made things easy to do, because this is it, right? This is the screen in front of us, the microphone in front of my mouth, and that's been our connection. And it's so easy to just ignore, shut off, zone out, because when I'm in front of you, you can notice the little things like my breath and where I'm sitting and how I'm looking and whatnot. I could turn my camera off right now and it'd just be my my avatar. I can't do that. Can you imagine doing that and sitting in front of that? That'd be an episode for Black Mirror or something like that.
The interview would get shorter if it was just your avatar. One of the things that has shown up in a number of the questions that people sent in, knowing we were going to talk, is how not asking about your particular assessment of American evangelicalism, but advice on voicing it. And you can imagine people in different contexts in different parts of the country, in different kinds of congregations and such. But if you want to be heard and be clear, is there any wisdom you have for this moment where, there's not a lot of ambiguity about the most dominant destructive forces at work in our socio-political historical moment?
Yes. I mean, man, another good question. I mean, I'm definitely not one of those YouTube ads that says, hey, stop right there. I'm going to tell you in the 5 simple steps right now how to become a speaker and be heard. And it's like, man, I wish I knew more. I mean, I feel like after that talk that I gave that you were referring to a while back, I don't know if I'm the best person because, man, I don't really get asked to do much anymore. Right. And so, in fact, I've been trying to quote unquote rebrand myself, if that's even a thing anymore. Of course, then COVID hit and now we're all, just doing these virtual things and stuff. So I think, I don't know, it was like when I wrote my book with Brill, it was an eye-opening experience to see how much of the evangelical indoctrination had come out in just how I write. Mm-hmm. And that was, the first round of revisions was just like, man, this just sounds like a church book. And I remember looking at the manuscript and thinking, really? I thought I was doing a good job of that. And just right, the blinders that we can have. I mean, I don't know. I think one of the things I've felt like what folks can do is be who they are. Like, I feel the most comfortable when I am myself. I'm not trying to be Michael Eric Dyson. I'm not trying to be James Cone. I'm not trying to be another person and to walk in that. To quote T.D. Jakes, don't try to take somebody else's anointing, right? It's like, get too preachy and whatnot. But I do think there's something about that, because I think as a Black male growing up, there wasn't that many role models in front of me, right? And most of the role models I had were usually white men. When I was in Young Life, that's really all I had in front of me, and knowing who you are and then feeling good enough to say what it is, you have to say, and then staying to that. I can always tell, like, where does a person stand when somebody disagrees with you? Like, and where does a person stand when the majority is disagreeing with your point of view? Like, are you going to continue to stand in that, And I'm not saying like, oh, if you're given more evidence and stuff like that, like, not to bury your heels. But my point in saying that is that there's a populace right now, right, that's growing that says we should reframe U.S. history because, it is dividing in anything that has to do with critical race theory or engagement is non-patriotic. Like, if you're in those spaces, right, hearing that, will you change your tune? Will you not? Or will you stand in it? And that's part of what I've learned, is to stand in it. Like, when you get called into the principal's office, I remember one time you asked me, like, man, what is going on at North Park? It's like, man, I tell you, when I get called into the principal's office, man, it's like standing in there and standing your, to use a phrase, standing your ground. It's a rough phrase. But my point in all of that is crafting it in such a way. And I don't know, what formats are good. I think I did the podcast because it was something I felt like I could do because I like messing with audio and something I could get out much faster than writing a book, right? We all know, right, the process of writing a book, it just takes a while. And, I don't know what was it, John Piper, who put out a book on COVID or something like that, like back in February. I was like, I don't know how this fool got that thing out that quick.
Well, it's amazing what a collection of ghostwriters can do.
Right.
When your cliff notes are, who are we going to blame God's sovereign judgment prior to the creation of the world on? Like,
yeah, that's the truth, man. That is the truth. So yeah, I mean, that's, I think that as a person of color, I've tried to, now that some people refer to me, right, as a senior scholar, I'm like, I don't feel like no damn senior scholar, but I guess if I'm tenured and I'm, labeled a full professor, I'll fill those boots the best that I can and try to help as many people as I can, so that they don't have to experience what I had to experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want somebody else to experience a decade on the adjunct trail. I don't want somebody else to have to deal with some of the pitfalls that I had to deal with. It's like, let me help you, negotiate contracts. Like, what does that mean, when you're on the front end, when you come in, and how many points are you going to get for, the scholarship you've already done, and where are they going to start you? What year are you going to start on the tenure track? All those things, right? School of Hard Knocks. If I can help somebody, and help prepare them, I always tell folks, man, find people in your field and just bug the hell out of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. One of the other questions, well, there are two questions connected to it, and two questions specifically about your work in looking at hip hop as a place for, or the context for, theological reflection, had to do with more of your kind of, I don't know, theology or philosophy of culture. So when you think of what is getting itself done in culture and its artistic expressions, like you mentioned film earlier, or music and these type of things, like, how do you introduce culture and its aesthetic expressions as material for thinking theologically? Because I think that, like, once it's acknowledged as a valid source, then there's a whole lot more members of different religious communities who then know what to do. But until you learn how to hear and read those texts as sacred texts, you don't get what's going on.
Absolutely. Man, I tell you, well, I mean, if I'm teaching undergrad, I mean, I'll break it down, right? So the majority of my teaching is with undergrad students. I mean, there's already some familiarity because there's something like, I don't know, the last 3 years of me teaching my course on hip hop culture and theology, there's been a certain sense among students of, between 18 and 21, 22, who have coming in yearning and asking certain questions already. So in that sense, I haven't had to work too hard for setting up the tea, if you will, to have that inquiry. The challenge comes when I'm dealing with graduate and, an adult level PhD doctoral work, where there's been more indoctrination, right, to a sense of, well, this is how you are supposed to go about the process of this and that and inquiry, that we have to have more of that conversation. So in those senses, I try to back in with different forms of art, whether it be graffiti, whether it be beat making, whether it be DJing, whether it be breakdancing, whether it be spoken word. That's always an easy way, so some kind of introduction to that. And then also, what is the physicalness of that? Here in Chicago, I'm fortunate to live near, Phil Jackson, who runs the house, the underground house, out in Lawndale, which is an amazing place. If y'all have never been, highly recommend to go. It's really one of the only places in the entire U.S. that really, truly practices, lives out, and just embraces all of hip-hop culture. And, taking somebody there to see it and to be a part of that and to be to be able to put your hand on graffiti and to smell some of that paint still drying. There's something about that. There's something about seeing somebody break dance in front of you. Videos just can't do it justice. There's something about somebody in front of you having a battle rap. Of which, Phil hosts at least once a year, the hip hop revival, although this year was obviously a little different, but every other year, right. It's just being present in that community and it's open, right. People just come from the community. Right. And so that experience changes if you allow it to change you and stuff. So there's something about the physicalness. Even when I taught in Pasadena, when we, started our doctoral program, I'm like, man, we're going to places in Los Angeles to experience this and to begin that inquiry to get out of our heads and into actually our bodies. And that's something that I'm trying to do more of, is to get out of my head and just to get into my body. Because that's really where hip hop and spirituality exists, is in the entire body. And so it's helping folks to get there. Undergraduates, younger, are quick to get there, real quick. As folks get older, naturally, it's just a little bit more difficult. But like I said, when there's the physical, I had my good friend John Gill, who I know you know as well, Dr. John Gill. He came out, when I was teaching at Fuller as well, and I had him come out, do a demonstration. And again, just people seeing that and being like, oh, okay, you're not as bad as I thought. Let me ask you these questions, and I just wanted to know why. Because ultimately, a lot of people just want to ask the questions. It's like I tell my white students when I teach intercultural communication, like, look, we're going to be together for the next 17 weeks. I'm going to give you some free shots. So if you want to ask me your ignorant questions, because when you get out there, you get online, you get in them spaces, it ain't going to go nice. Ask me your dumb questions so we can actually begin to learn. Like, well, how do black people, let's get it out. Let's just get it out now, right? And that, for me, is part of what the classroom is that space for learning.
So what are the 3 most popular ignorant questions that get asked?
In which class?
Whichever. The ones that, when they come up, you're like, you're mostly looking at the rest of the class to go who is waiting for someone to ask this?
Right. I mean, there's always the syllabus questions, even more so now in a virtual realm, because I can't physically point to the syllabus here on this page right here. See,
I respond with emails cut and pasting out of the syllabus. And the only thing I type is reply with care. That's right. A new move. I got so frustrated.
Right. I need to probably do some of that. I usually refer to the page number and be like, that's on page 15 of the syllabus. Do you have any specific questions? In regards to that. I just had literally 5 emails prior to this, to our talk and stuff, man, of students asking well, I just don't know what to do. Well, bro, it's week 5. I mean, you don't know what to do. I mean, there was, some of the stunning ones I've gotten, and this is not in my current place, but this is what at my last place teaching was, on the first night. And this was a question that was on the hearts of particularly a lot of white folks come to find out. And it was, what is the difference between a nigger and a black man? Right? Right off the bat, I ain't even got a chance to introduce the class. And that's your first question. First black professor they've ever had. And they're just I've just always wanted to know that. You're my first black professor. 10 minutes into class, and that's your opening line, right? Of course, I've had the questions Professor, can I go to the bathroom? I'm just dude, you are in college. You can do what you got to do. And then there's always the folks who try to argue against certain things, particularly in regards to. I had a student a couple years ago who swore up and down that hip hop was just tearing the black community apart. It was a white student, right? Who was just tearing the hip hop or tearing the black community apart, and that it was misrepresenting black folk. And I was like, I just let them go on for 6 minutes, and just hip hop, and that's the latest video by. I was like, interesting. Where do you get your information from, right? And it's points to these 2 YouTube videos and stuff, man. So it's fielding some of that and trying to help folks understand I don't want to come off as I'm the big scholar in the room. And at the same time, like, well, you're in this class for a reason, and I'm here, so let's try to make our way down. But yeah, definitely, most of the stupid questions, though, unfortunately, get asked around assignments in the syllabus. If you've never followed me on Facebook, I try to post some of those things at the end of every semester.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that it's a real gift for people to have an opportunity to ask really dumb questions when you're in a culture that presumes you are aware.
Yeah.
And you're not, right? Like, and this comes in, all sorts of different things, like even teaching like weird philosophy classes where you assume certain things are previously known, right? Like, who's David Hume? And you're like, I didn't think I was having to explain that, right? Like, even there's so many contexts where these a priori assumptions you have, reign. But when it goes around topics that are live ethical questions where you want to be on the good side, right? Ignorance for people of privilege is embarrassing. Even though what you're saying is like, I'd rather you in this space where I want to help you, like expel your ignorance in the form of a question so that you aren't acting a fool later in life.
Right.
And those type of things happen in educational context, in the context of friendship and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's I do think people have a lot of anxiety when they're stuck with a situation and they don't have those relationships, right? Where they can ask those questions and stuff.
Yes. Absolutely.
And you kind of want to just be like, why not? Like, what led you to get to a point where you had zero friends where you were allowed to ask this question?
And that's a question I always ask. Exactly. Like, yeah, exactly. What were the circumstances that led you to be in a space where you don't have, those questions? And ultimately for the folks who say, well, I do have those folks and ideas, I want to be, this racial healer. I always say, like, hey, it's like my friend Rashida Graham always says, it's like, or Rashida Washington, excuse me. She says, who are the people that you lean on who are different than you? Like, who are the people that you have, right, in your top 10 list that you will call upon? You got an emergency. You get locked out of your house. Like, who do you call? And then what's their ethnicity, right? And so that's like, for me, like that's the next level. It's like the first level, okay, let's get all the dumb questions out and I'll help process some of that stuff, and allowing that in the context of class. And I know, some Black and brown Latinx colleagues of mine will probably look at me and be like, man, dude, but this thing is like, and I get that. I genuinely, it's part of my own way of just saying, okay, let's have the conversation. Because students aren't getting more savvier per se in regards to race. If anything, they're becoming more confused, not necessarily ignorant, but confused. Which way, like there's the 1619 project. Now there's the 1776 project. Like which one is right, professor? You know what I'm saying? It's like we're getting to that point, right? So it's going to be interesting to see my daughter's kind of age group, those born around 2005, 2006, 2007, in their history texts, when they start showing up into college classrooms, what conversations they're going to be having.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's it is striking how much the way you tell a story shapes what's handed on. And the thing about Trump's whole like, oh, we have to come up with this new way of telling it, even though the new way is basically how Americans have always told it for a long time, right? They were like, oh, we're uncomfortable with the fact the 1619 project exists, so let's go back with the Whitey Says version of American history. But see, like that whole, like his performance points to the fact that most critical theories wanted to say is true forever. History is history, and it's also told. And if you want to know the power of history, it's actually in how it's told. Like, how is the past present in any moment is not just what happened, but how that happening has been valued, interpreted, what elements are prioritized and handed on to the present.
Yeah.
And And when you recognize the interpretation is not just the inertia of the past, and like history doesn't come value free, then to be in any tradition, America, the church, means that you're gifted with this responsibility to recapitulate your story in the most life-giving way possible, which means unlearning certain habits and emphasizing other trajectories. And I've gotten real frustrated on these. I've been doing these. Well, I hope these people aren't in this group. Whatever, but I've been facilitating a couple. Let's be vague. Graduate collectives of practicing ministers looking for the non-academic doctoral affirmation. And in both groups of cohorts, there are 2 or 3 older, like, not millennials, so older millennial white ministers who have a type of affection for that nostalgic telling that they want to render what they've experienced positively as normative for everyone.
Yeah.
And then they want to say that, like, the changes that are being demanded that they, have a openness towards are just like a baby step or 2 away. And I mean, I don't even know what to do with that. Like, I mostly just think to myself, I'm pretty sure your congregation, because you're acting so passive, has more people in it that will make you aware that this is not the case. And yet there's this energy in them to go, Ugh. And then you see in the same class of doctoral ministry students, right? People that aren't in that age group who are just like, no, it is that bad trip, and I don't know what I'm allowed to say because there's a lot of baby boomers in charge of my church or my organization or my nonprofit. So, like, when you're looking at that, like, generational thing, do you think, like, the slowness to act is just like our lifespan's gotten longer and baby boomers have got, like, influence for an extended period of time, and then their kids were screwed economically for ways that they weren't? And so now, like, in most churches, most nonprofits, the average age of major contributors is significantly older than it was 30 or 40 years ago. And so, like, that just changeover of cognitive process generationally hasn't happened. So you have, like, more volume of people going, this is BS. But now, like, grandpas and grandma are still alive, and they have more money than their grandkids who are 35 with degrees and jobs.
Right.
So, like, I feel like there's more that is making the uncomfortability going on, and I can't figure it out. But I feel like, anyway, that's.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I also think, I mean, to add to that, I would say that, I think as a society, as a world, we're in a space now where, we're trying to figure out what does the future look like. We're at a space now where, we're all connected, so to speak, one way or another through the internet. We're we've got all these aspects of technology around us. I think we're trying to figure out as a species, where do we go from here? Like, is war really the best answer? Well, okay, I don't know. Obviously, it's still going on. It's like, you can think about, capitalism or late capitalism, as some of my my colleagues, would say, my Marxist and Engels colleagues, we think about, what does that look like, late capitalism in 2020, 2021 moving forward? What does it mean with NASA? They just announced today that they're going back to the moon, right? And they're going to include a woman in that. What does it mean with the, the James Webb telescope that can detect life on other planets? I mean, I think we are trying to figure out as a species, right? Like, where do we fit in this cog? And I mean, that's what I love about Rick and Morty, right? I mean, it's just this brass knuckles type. Here it is. This is what's going on. And I do think that there is that sense that there's the old guard. I mean, I know that because I've seen that at my school. You got people who should have retired 10 years ago, right? And I like learning from them. But if you were in a space where you're still giving, but you got such a death grip on this thing and nobody can do it like me, and damn it, this is the way we've always done it, that, man, there's just no room, right? There's no room. And I'm trying my hardest not to be that. Like, I started the Journal of Hip Hop Studies. It's like, I handed it over and was just like, I need to step aside and allow somebody else to have a different vision for this thing and move forward. And I'm not going to lie. It's always an ego and a knock on the ego for something that I started. Like, you'd be like, well, this is the way we used to do it. Even in hip hop studies, you got young cats coming through. They don't know what it was like in the 90s and in the 2000s when even if you mention hip hop and religion, people will castigate you among the lepers, right? It's like, man, it's like, no, man. And now people just want to talk like it's no thing. And you got all kind of sources you can pick from. Like, man, I'm picking from the walls back in 2002. So I have to recognize, because I do think there's a yin and a yang that can go with older generations, newer generations. But, man, I tell you, it's like I said before, it's like we got to get over so many bumpers, right? And so many obstacles. But, yeah, there are some major shifts that are happening, I think, in regards to that. And, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what this next decade brings. We'll see.
Yeah, it was a fascinating, fascinating answer. So realizing what time we're at, there were a number of questions related to Tupac, because I guess they Googled you, and
yes.
What is it like? One, this is not their question. This is mine. They're like, when you get Googled, something cool as shit comes up. You know what I mean? Like if you Google me, it's like dead Germans and weird words that philosophers use about process, or like Trip likes beer. That's what comes up. You Google you, it's like Tupac comes up.
Man.
You know what I mean? Like just like your Google juice is cooler.
And hey, I've never heard that, but I'll take it.
So, if for people that don't know your own relationship with, one, like Los Angeles as a city, and then Tupac as a kind of poet of the city and its transitions and stuff over time, like, how would you introduce like his story, his work, his art, and what it gives voice to for like that period of time in Los Angeles?
All right. Let me see if I can sum this up. You're right. I just did notice the time too, man. I can definitely get deep into conversation.
It's amazingly easy for the two of us to talk because I like you.
I like you too, man.
And I sometimes talk longer in questions when I'm enjoying the conversation. It's a secret of listening to the podcast. If Trip talks as much as the guest, it's because he's actually enjoying it. And
there you go. I like that.
Yeah. Some people are like, why didn't you let Dan talk more? I was like, because I was having fun.
That's I
wanted to say things. So
that's right.
Tupac, Los Angeles. I want you to know that when I moved to Los Angeles, I think I knew 3 Tupac songs. And then the first time I had a youth tell me, like, do you not know Tupac? And I was like, you mean Changes? You know?
Right.
So I feel like he captured, like, the work you've done with him captures the questions that go on in that particular context, in that particular genre, and then shows like how you wrestle with it theologically, engaging culture.
Well, I think, he is the representative, right? The post-soul representative of the hip-hop community. Yes, you have others, and yes, you have people like Kendrick, and yes, you have, early Kanye. I don't know where the hell Kanye is now, but, early Kanye. Tupac really, though, was the genesis of that. He embodies, right, that sense of the sacred, the profane, the secular, and really poses those questions, those critical questions of why does it have to be this way? How does it have to be this way? Can we imagine something different? And he's talking about this stuff back in the 90s, man. I mean, so much of it that he was ahead of his time. I mean, thinking about a hip hop political candidate being like, nah, man, I can't get with Democrats. I can't get with Republicans. We need somebody who represents us, not me, right? But somebody, I'm going to be able to set that up. I mean, I think the stuff that he was trying to do by organizing, street gangs and street cliques and crews, by, the Thug Life Code. Again, those are all things of empowerment. Those are all things that allow somebody the choice, right? Like, do I need to live this way, or can I understand money, economics, wealth at a different level? Even though he himself struggled with that, like when he died, he had like $200,000 maybe in the bank, which I'll take, but comparatively, that's nothing, in that world that he lived in. Representative of both coasts, right? Born on the East Coast, and but really is known for his West Coast, banter and mantra, right? He came up at a time when people didn't even know who Snoop Dogg was. I remember Snoop Dogg rapping at Long Beach, city festivals. He had no stage presence. He could flow, but he had no stage presence. Scared as all get out. And so Pac, and I'm not saying like Pac brought him along. I mean, he was really with, Snoop was with Dre, but Pac, he centered that when he came to Death Row already, and really brought out really that the edge of what we're still trying to navigate in hip hop. And that is police terrorism, right? Racial inequality, racial inequity, the fact that our neighborhoods are still in some of the worst shapes that we've seen, right? In easily 50 years. So all those things are still present. Not much has changed since his death in 96. And so Tupac is really the external manifestation of an ongoing journey and relationship between POCs, Black America, those who are downtrodden, those who are marginalized, disenfranchised, to find God and transcendence.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things about your book that strikes me in this moment is, one, it has a soundtrack to telling you what it's like to hear the system say, we're going to do better, and then it doesn't. So like after the riots in Los Angeles, think of how much money was supposedly poured in to Los Angeles, and the effects. Like, right. Who knows where that money went? Like, maybe you could say a bit about that, because I think it's important to hear that for people of privilege, that there's a reason that you get eye rolls from protesters, right? It's not because like they believe, oh, you finally going to listen and do something. No, like you finally listened and done something a bunch of times and put millions of dollars in, and let me tell you what happened.
Right. And that's just it. I mean, and that continues to be. I mean, you listen to some of his interviews, particularly his archival interviews. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like he's talking about today, right? I mean, there is none. I mean, when he talks, his thoughts and philosophy on charity. I mean, Tupac was very much so like, charity doesn't ever reaches the hood. Like if he's going to do something, he was about being that presence in the hood. But he also had enough self-awareness, especially in his latter years, to branch off and to begin to develop that into a network, and which is saddening because you can't tell the Black story without the FBI and the feds being involved in some level. And you also can't point to anything really since that era that Black people have, that we have, that is independent and for us. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have Oprahs. Yes, you have, NFL, NBA stars. That's still individualized money. And while those families may have born-in wealth, and you have a Jay-Z and Beyonce and whatever, nothing exists like Black Wall Street. And what Tupac was trying to bring was that element in a modern fashion, and, to connect the community, politics, education, religion in many regards, and of course, socioeconomics, jobs for people. And this is all in his manifesto. I mean, you can just read his stuff. There's a great book, Tupac Legacy, and the way it's written and laid out, it's like an anthropologist's dream. It came out right when I was finishing up my PhD, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I highly recommend listeners going and checking that book out, because it really does have some key information about what Tupac was dealing with, and why in 2020 people were so mad that George Floyd, Jacob Blake, people like that are still being killed, and why people will burn shit down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that you brought up on your podcast about how blind the white church is to the structural passive violence of the domination system. That, like, when you look, so like one of the ways ideologies function is creating a cover up by pointing at a problem. And so the destruction of property, private property, in a protest becomes the thing you point at, so you can deny all the violence in the system that is this bursting breakthrough. And I think one of the elements of hip hop that you emphasize, it strikes me, is that I remember being a youth minister with other youth ministers, and you're like the only open and affirming church present, and probably the only youth group with anyone that's not like white. and they're like, well, we don't know about that hip hop because it glorifies gratuitous sex and urban violence.
Yes.
And they do this kind of thing, and the whole premise is we need to, one, deny the material conditions in which that art emerges, and then we need to deny the systemic and structural oppression where this violence emerges, be it reciprocal violence in the community, like gang violence and systems of poverty connected to the police and prison industrial complex, or like in protests, violence to property. Really, this whole thing involves this cover up, because to acknowledge those systems is so offensive to what you think is really yours because it's stolen.
Yeah.
And that's like been something ever since, well, I guess it was 5 or 6 years ago when we first talked. And what was the first book, the first, well, at least the first one 5 or 6 years ago that I read of yours around?
Let's see. That would have been, well, is it The Soul of Hip Hop, or
maybe it was. Aaron Wyma told me about it. Who?
Yeah, it probably was The Soul of Hip Hop, or Heaven Has a Ghetto.
Okay, and after that is what it was like, after reading that, is the diagnosis that what's going on, and that those youth ministry contexts and those church contexts, and then those kind of like white phobic of reality outside of my world, is they need the concealment and the cover up of passive structural violence. And hip hop is like, nah, here's reality. Deal with it.
Yeah. Straight up. I mean, absolutely. It is that. And it's still that, particularly for those naysayers who say, well, commercial hip hop. Absolutely. I mean, commercial hip hop is just that, right? They're selling to make money. But the culture, the roots are still there. Absolutely. And they haven't gone anywhere. And if anything, it's much more global.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, when you think of this moment, like after you've seen the responses, are you more or less optimistic than you were a year ago about the church not embarrassing the one it calls Lord?
Oh man. I'm optimistic for something new to emerge, and I don't know what that is. I really don't. Both Emily and I don't go to, a current church, just because I don't feel like anything fits. It's just same old, right? Pig with lipstick. And I don't know. I'm just not in there in that space anymore. I'm very pessimistic about, and particularly for my Black and Latinx communities, because there's so much of some of the same recycled jargon. I remember going to one conference. I'm not going to name it, but I remember going to one conference and the theme was, disrupting the darkness. And I was like, oh, all right. Yes, let's get in it. Absolutely. And all it was just these cats getting up and yelling, like who could yell louder and stuff, and who could get the most amens. And then I'm like, oh, dear God. So I'm pessimistic about that, because at the end of the day, people love what's comfortable, right? And I get that. And I don't, it's difficult because when you feel like you know what is coming next, it's cool. But it was like when you don't know and wrestling with that, like it can be unnerving, and it's not for everybody, right? It's depressing and bring on anxiety, suicidal ideations, the whole 9 yards. Like when you feel like your entire world is crashing. Like I said, I'll leave it with I'm optimistic about what may come.
Mm-hmm. You have to admit, the name Disrupting the Darkness is probably not ideal for a conference title that's going to unsettle white supremacy. It's already been disrupting darkness for years. And that kind of like binary logic is just so centered in our logic and language that it's problematic. Alton Pollard, who's he's at Howard's Divinity School, I think now, but he gave this talk called The Endarkenment as opposed to the Enlightenment.
Okay.
Where he outlined this kind of like alternative, enlightenment in that type of binary, like of the positive and negative. And one of the things that struck me in that lecture, and it's something you've really brought up, is the way that the logic of whiteness is a disembodied and dislocated type. And that's necessary to preserve a domination system that can impose itself on any situation and anybody. And he's wrestling with it in this context of white supremacy. But the fascinating thing that he emphasized and seems more and more true to me over time is that same logic is problematic even to white bodies within it. Like when you think of how something like sexuality and identity and stuff plays out in white evangelicalism, there's plenty of people thrown out, required to deny and repress in all sorts of ways by that same logic that's connected to white supremacy, even though they, have the, there's Anglo as can be.
Yes, absolutely, man. I mean, yes. And it's the same thing Tim Wise talks about, right? It's like, white supremacy isn't just bad for people of color. It's bad for white people as well. It destroys at the core and at the heart of who a person is. It just does so visibly with people of color and almost invisibly to white folks. But absolutely. No, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the last question was, someone asked, what album, would you meditate on in this moment? Like, so not like a song, like, or not, but yeah, like you're going to listen to the album straight through like it was 95 because you don't have an iPod or anything to listen to the whole thing.
Right. Oh man, I'm torn. I mean, at least right now, the mood I'm in, I think it would either be The Roots Undone, which is a great concept album, or Me Against the World. I mean, there's so many things that every time I go back and listen to that album that I'm hearing, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is powerful. And really with where we're at. And that's kind of how I've felt for a while, this Me Against the World sense. And then of course the Undone album with The Roots, they're, talking about, suicide and depression and alcoholism and, just these identity issues and so much more personal. I feel like Tupac is like putting it out there in community, and The Roots is really they're much more personal. So those are the two, at least today. If you ask me tomorrow, it might be something else, but those are the two today that pop in when you ask that question.
Well, they're great. I think it's a wonderful response. So thank you for hanging out on the internet and answering my questions and some friends of mine's questions. So it's been a blast. Is there a website address you want to send people to?
Absolutely. And I just want to thank you for having me, and thanks for these questions. I love these questions. Adam's a good friend of mine, and I appreciate the work he's done and whatnot. So, you can reach me at just real simple, whitehodge.com. White like the color, Hodge, Hodge. Think of Dodge just with an H. Or if you want to Google me and see what this Google juice, this cool Google juice that Trip was just talking about is about, you can do that as well. But you go to the website and you can, see my band Twitter account and other social media accounts. And then I have some sample chapters there and links to the podcast and all that good stuff. But it's been a pleasure, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, it's been a blast. And I think we all look forward to Lecrae coming on your podcast to apologize. And
that's right.
Like, I used to think Dave Matthews Band had the worst fans.
Dave Matthews. Yeah, no doubt, man. No doubt. I have been reaching out to him. So if he's listening to this, man, hit a brother up, man. He ain't responded.
All right.